Hello everyone, this is Ange. Welcome to my mostly compilation of my previous Majikoi Watashi Koishinasai or Majikoi review videos. This is going to be a long one, so just sit back and enjoy. I've stated multiple times through many videos on my channel that the original Majikoi Watashi Koishinasai or Majikoi Love Me Seriously is my #1 favorite visual novel of all time, and it's not even close. However, I realize I haven't made a video specifically reviewing it, so that's what I'm going to do in this one. This won't be a traditional objective review where I give a score and tell people what it's about. You want to see that kind of review? There's plenty of other people who have reviewed the original Majikoi visual novel on YouTube. Instead, this is going to be more like a structured, edited rant where I explain what got me into Majikoi to begin with and very specific things I like a lot about it. I don't know how many people watching this video have been reading visual novels for over 10 years, but for those who have been in the visual novel scene since over a decade ago, you might remember that there was a time when Majikoi was just a partial fan translation. I actually got into the Majikoi VN when my online friend, who was my equivalent of a drug dealer for visual novels at the time, told me I would like this game based on the slice of life romance anime I liked. And wow, this game almost immediately blew me away. Emphasis on almost. See, at that point, Majikoi had the exact type of goofy, over-the-top comedy I really liked. However, when I started it up, I didn't know that was what I wanted at the time, since my favorite slice-of-life comedy anime at that point included stuff like Azumanga Daioh and Lucky Star, but Majikoi somehow went even further in its goofy over-the-topness. Thankfully, after about an hour getting used to the comedy, it ended up being the funniest thing I'd seen at the time, and still one of the best overall humor I've seen in visual novels and any weeb media to this day. Describing why I like Majikoi's comedy so much can be difficult since comedy is subjective and all that jazz. Just calling it goofy and over the top doesn't narrow things down, as there are series that technically do this kind of comedy that I don't like at all. With Majikoi, I appreciate that the characters are willing to constantly roast each other, but they do it out of love, especially within the Kazama family. Even the sidecast has their gimmicks. For example, Kokoro is ungodly full of herself, while Yukie uses her phone strap Matsukaze to bring out her secret, snarky, savage side. While some gimmicks may work for some characters and some not for others, I find that the vast majority actually worked for me more often than not. There is enough variation within these goofy jokes despite this being a 50+ hour visual novel where you get to see the same 30 to 40 characters pretty often. What also helps is that no one is safe from being made fun of or having a gimmick. Even Gakuto, who represents the more generic, openly perverted loser bro character, it's not like every male character is a complete loser. In fact, Toma from Class 2S is actually bisexual and good at getting the ladies, while the Kazama family leader, Shoichi, or Cap, is insanely lucky and popular with women, but he just cares more about his childlike sense of adventure than things like lust or love, except for one very important memorable moment in one specific route. While we're on the talk of various characters, long before I was a weird girl fan, I was much more into childhood friends. This visual novel having 3 potential childhood friend heroines who were part of the friend group growing up sounded like a dream come true for me. And speaking of dreams, Miyako was like the perfect fantasy for a relatively newer weeb like me. A busty childhood friend who's really open about confessing to you and even openly wanting to have sex? Younger monkey brain version of me thought this was the hottest thing ever. Over time, I've recognized that Miyako is definitely a very toxic female character, which is part of the point, but I found more female VN heroines who are just as perverted and funny as her without being nearly as toxic. Still, I have to admit I have some nostalgia for Miyako since she set the bar really high for the types of heroines I would tend to prefer going forward. Going back to the main childhood friend group, this was ultimately possibly the biggest reason of many that I came to really like Majikoi. At the point that I'd read it, I'd seen multiple power of friendship stuff through cheesy shonen plots in anime and JRPGs to a smaller extent. Some slice of life anime had small groups of friends with decent wholesomeness. However, I thought Majikoi both back then and even now, as the Gen Zoomers like to say, clears every Japanese created high school friend group I've seen in fiction. The Kazama family doesn't need things like the power of friendship speeches to show how close they are. It's the ultimate case of show don't tell. The fact that they get excited just to walk to school together and joke around says a lot. When 2 new girls are recruited in and one is a straight up bitch calling their secret base an old waste of space that needs to be scrapped, she naturally gets almost all of them riled up. And when there's a moment when one of their friends gets beaten up by a bad guy, they will be there to get revenge. This is the beauty of the Kazama family, and they are overall the best done characters in the original Majikoi, with the true route Agave straight up being all about their bond. As much as I love the sequels Majikoi S and A fan discs for having lots of well done heroine routes, I'm personally saddened that the Kazama family has been much less consistently important throughout routes and themes over time. which is why I ultimately still prefer the original Majikoi over the many sequels and fan discs. Having said that though, if it was just the Kazuma family that were the only good characters in Majikoi, it would be at best a great visual novel for me, but not my all-time favorite. What helps elevate the already great main cast is the fact that the supporting cast is somehow both really big in number and memorable individually, something an ensemble cast from other visual novels and even other media struggle to replicate. From the overly bombastic Hideo and his super simp maid Azumi, to the resident extreme lolicon Jun, to the Kazuma family's robot Cookie, and my personal favorite, the ever so relatable Suguru. Suguru was easily my favorite character in the non-main cast because of how hilarious he was in terms of making fun of extreme incel-like nerdy otakus. His constant complaints about the 3D world and women and how the 2D world was better were executed really hilariously to me. His humor never got old, to the point where he had some of my favorite scenes in the original Majikoi, like how he tased a girl in the Kawakami War in the Momoyo route for the girl trying to flash him, or how in another route he got ever so slightly attracted to Chika, which made him feel insecure about his love for 2D girls, so he purposely went to a brothel to make him heavily dislike the experience enough to go all in on hating 3D women for life so it would never happen again. Once again, it's a shame Suguru after the original Majikoi kind of became a more boring, snarky straight man character because he was amazingly hilarious in the original. One thing that tends to disappoint me in visual novels is action scenes, because story-heavy visual novels that feature them tend to have those scenes be ridiculously overly long and padded out with boring narration of fights and monologues, even though there are cool backdrop CGs to complement them. The Majikoi series does not have this issue, having fights that are quick and snappy while still being memorable. There's really cool text and even some funny punchlines as the basis for some fights. Sure, there's still the issue that many fights are just PNGs with loud sound effects, but when this is essentially a novel with a lot of text and characters, I appreciate that the fights generally don't take too long, but are usually good ways to advance the plot or character development. That brings me to what makes many of the heroine routes in Majikoi very memorable to me: the over-the-top random competitions. While some are straightforward one-on-one duels that the school can watch throughout the whole game, there's also route-specific huge competitions like the team-based Battle Royale in Yukie's route, and my personal favorite, the Kawakami War in Momoyo's route, which somehow puts all the characters of Class 2F versus 2S against each other, while giving each character defining roles with a great layer of strategy that Yamato and his rival Tomo take advantage of, feeling like the whole thing's shouting out one of those old-school real-time strategy RPGs but with a hilarious comedic flavor. So I've talked a lot about the comedy and action parts of Majikoi, which are great, and the mixture of the two is at the core of most of the experience. But what about the more serious stuff like the romance and drama? Well, it turns out Majikoi is also really good at that too, which heavily surprised me as I was expecting lighthearted themes to be basically 95% of the time. As early as the common route, I actually like the drama where Chris, despite being a newer member of the Kazuma family, quickly causes friction by criticizing the secret base that the friend group has been using for years. This scene understandably led many Majikoi readers I know to hate her, but for me, it was the opposite. It showed that even closed-minded people can change their hearts with good communication. This is the type of drama you rarely see in any media, let alone visual novels. It's a type you could potentially see in real life too. The drama in the heroine routes can be surprisingly good too. For example, everything about Yukie learning not to need Matsukaze was a really nice story. I personally liked how it took Miyako almost breaking up the friend group for her to finally grow past her toxic dependencies into a much better person. What many fans I know consider the standout drama in the original Majikoi is Wanko's route, straight up being the one route that's a really sad, emotional Nakige in the whole series. I'll let you read her route for you to figure out why. I somehow got this far and haven't talked about the main protagonist, Yamato. Back when I first read this visual novel way back in the early 2010s, when it was just a partial fan patch, I was already a huge fan of Yamato for having a way more likable personality than any visual novel protagonist I'd read up to that point. In fact, for a long time, he was pretty easily my second favorite visual novel protagonist, only behind Kenichi from Shara Kuni, who's basically been my #1 visual novel protagonist for like forever. Back when Majikoi first got its fan translation, this was during a time when Battle of Wits anime like Death Note and Code Geass were super big. Sadly, decades later, shows like this have become rare, with Kakegururi being the only modernist show to be nearly as entertaining as those. I bring this up because Yamato has a gray area morality similar to Battle of Wits protagonists like Light Yagami and Lelouch v Britannia, but with Yamato naturally tuned to fit a much more lighthearted, comedy-focused visual novel. This leads Yamato to be very smart and calculating while using his many social connections to take advantage and trick people to one-up others in competitions, especially since he's nowhere near physically strong as the superpowered female characters. In addition to moments where he naturally wins with his intellect, he has his own intellectual bisexual rival, Tomo from Class 2S, which makes for some really fun back and forth exchanges. Though I do wish Tomo flirting with him was cut down a bit. But Yamato being so smart while still being loyal to his friend group humanizes him much more than characters like Light and Lelouch, while fun as protagonists ultimately are basically villains. Sadly, as much as I love Yamato, he does ultimately lead to one of the few big issues I have with Majikoi as a whole: his tendency to occasionally struggle-snuggle grape people. Look no further than Chris's route, where it has Yamato who resolved her route drama by graping her in her sleep, which, yeah, not the best plot twist in this game. What doesn't help is that it worked, and Chris treats the whole thing like she was at fault, which sadly means this whole scene basically ruined Chris's route for me, even though it was really good before this part. While Yamato has only done this type of stuff maybe a few more times throughout the whole Majikoi series, having this precedent start in one of the original's main routes has at points made me reconsider the original Majikoi visual novel as my #1 favorite ever. Thankfully, the very few flaws I have with Majikoi are easily negated with its equivalent of a true route, the agave route. This is by far the most serious route in the whole series that goes all in on drama, yet somehow keeps the relatively lighthearted, goofy tone without feeling jarring. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but all the buildup of serious elements foreshadowed in other routes leads to really cool, yet surprisingly emotional fight scenes. Most importantly, I'll call it by far the most Kazuma family-centered route. As I said earlier in this video, the Kazuma family is basically my lifeblood for this series. Having a route focused on the ultimate friendship between them, no romance, just the plot testing their friendship bonds, while involving many side characters, not only makes Agave likely my favorite Majikoi route, but also possibly my favorite true route in any visual novel. I could legitimately go on ranting about why Majikoi Love Me Seriously is my #1 favorite visual novel. There are so many little things I haven't mentioned yet that contribute to it still being my favorite visual novel over a decade later, but I have to stop somewhere. I think you get my point by now. Majikoi is essentially my ultimate jack-of-all-trades visual novel. It just does so many things well, having a very memorable protagonist and heroines, along with surprisingly good romance, easily my favorite friend group in any media, good, concise, but memorable action scenes, goofy, unique, over-the-top comedy, and occasionally good drama, all somehow mixed together in one package. While I still love all future Majikoi sequels and fanfics for what they are, when I consider each visual novel individually, none come close to matching the overall quality of the OG Majikoi. I'm very grateful I was able to find it through that fan translation all those years ago and still continue hyping it up and promoting it to as many upcoming visual novel fans today. The original Maji de Watashi ni Koishinasai, or Majikoi Love Me Seriously as officially localized by Jast, is one of, if not the most popular comedy slice-of-life heavy visual novels of all time. It's to the point that many YouTubers, myself included, have reviewed the original Majikoi visual novel at some point. However, there's an expansive sequel that many people, myself included, love at least almost as much as the original Majikoi, and many others hope that the official localizer translator Jast eventually gets to pick up and officially translate it. So whether you want to know if Majikoi S is worth the hype, if you only want to stick to official translations on Steam, or if you're just curious about this particular entry, in this video, I'm going to cover what's so great about Majikoi S. When I said Majikoi S is expansive, I was not exaggerating. Right from the beginning, the visuals and audios get a clear touch-up, sprites are much more animated, there's updated remixes of previous music, and plenty of fun new music tracks. There's even several hand-picked moments through a few routes where we straight up have animated cutscenes for specific moments. This is something I wish more action-heavy visual novel titles did. This expansion also extends to the amount of routes in Majikoi S. If you thought there were a lot of routes in the original Majikoi, then Majikoi S beats it by quite a lot, having essentially over twice as many available routes as the original Majikoi. As this is a sequel, kind of masquerading as a fan disc, you have your after stories for the original main 5 heroine routes from the original Majikoi. All these lean towards being wholesome and hilarious as you'd expect from the Majikoi series, with a personal favorite being Miyako, who somehow upped her moe level and maturity while still being the same lovable, perverted childhood friend. There's even an afterstory for the original Majikoi's true route, Agave, with 2 separate branches. One where you get to elect yourself into Stockholm Syndrome and get with the 3 powerful sisters who captured the main character Yamato in the original Agave, or you can go with a slightly more sane option and have a threesome with your 2 super horny childhood friends who started to openly lust Yamato after attempting to save him from these previously mentioned kidnapper sisters. Which reminds me, the H scenes in general are also expanded, feeling at least 1.5 times length the average H scene from the original Majikoi. Fun times either way though. A key feature many look forward to in Majikoi S is it giving routes to characters who were either popular or felt like they almost deserved a route based on the writing of the original Majikoi. In Majikoi S, there's now routes for Kokoro, the rich bitch from Class 2S, Iyo, Yukie's fellow underclassman and best friend outside of the Kazuma family, Margit, an extremely popular fan favorite being Chris's older sister figure and super powerful Watanfas, And there's even a route for Yumiko, a glasses-wearing third year I'm sure many people were not expecting to get a route. There's even a joke route for the premium girl by accessing the tutorial of all things. These routes are admittedly a little hit or miss, with many claiming they're a little too short compared to previous routes in the original Majikoi, with Margaret's in particular being accused of being a sex-heavy nukige. I personally take issue with Yumiko's route being a branch from the joke hermit crab ending for the original Majikoi, Yumiko's route being one of the few routes in all of the Majikoi series I outright dislike. Outside those complaints though, I still think these routes for previous characters are pretty fun with what they have. A lot of the hilarious comedy and goofy interactions you come to expect from the series, and so became enjoyable enough. However, the real fun of Majikoi S, and like why some people consider S and beyond a huge improvement over the original Majikoi, is the extreme upgrade of amounts of waifu options. If you thought Majikoi had a lot of heroine waifu options, after Majikoi S, that number straight up doubles by the end of Majikoi S's common route. Which reminds me of the reason why Majikoi S is officially considered a sequel and not a fan disc. It's because of the introduction of its new characters. If you branch off the afterstories of the original main 5 heroine routes, the common route is basically a way to introduce the many new characters. These include a few heroines part of the Bushido project, who are basically just hot female clones of previous Japanese male warlords, where the Kuki family is not just limited to Hideo and Ageha anymore. We sure up get to meet the whole family and even have a few new battle maids many consider even better than Azumi. There is a whole West Side school full of quirky characters that has a duel with Kawakami Academy. There's even a soft introduction to waifu warriors who hail from the in-universe version of China. This covers maybe half the amount of new characters and changes from Majikoi S, but sadly almost all the heroines I listed do not get routes until the even more expansive Majikoi A fan discs. Thankfully, there are 2 new brand new characters who get full-length routes that are quite fun and unique. The first being Tsubame, a new upperclassman in Momoyo's class, known for her goofy teasiness, but also an obsession with selling her family natto to everybody as much as possible. She's sometimes referred to as the female version of Yamato in a way where she's willing to be underhanded instead of winning through raw strength. Tsubame straight up has a unique route branch where you get to choose who gets to be the dom and sub of the relationship. If you've ever wanted to see something like this, then this is your route, because these are decently long branches with their own unique H scenes and romantic plot lines and such. The other new heroine who gets her own route is Manshiro Kuki, the first lolly character to get her own full-length route in the series. This route is super fun for a completely different reason from Tsubame's. Earlier I mentioned getting to meet the whole Kuki family. Yamano becomes Manshiro's butler, basically what Azumi is to Hideo, and you get to learn the inner workings of the Kuki butler-maid ranking system, where getting up the ranks generally means a higher standing by the great, powerful, rich Kuki family. Unless you're really against lolly routes, I think this is one of the better routes of the game for how crazy fun a lot of the battle butlers and maids can truly get, and how Yamano has to compete despite not being super physically powerful himself. The other reason why Majikoi S is considered a sequel instead of a fan disc is because it has an unlockable true route of sorts, and it's only tangentially related to the original Majikoi's true route Agave. The premise is based around Yamano going out with Koyuki from Class 2S. If you've read the original Agave route in Majikoi, you'll realize the true meaning of this relationship, as it's a completely new timeline what if. However, weirdly enough, Koyuki's route is barely about the romance with Koyuki herself. Instead, it's all about what the other routes of Majikoi S were slowly building up to, the whole point of the Bushido project I mentioned before. This route has some of the most chaotic fun fights in the whole series, basically becoming an all-out war, including Momoyo finally finding someone who's basically on her level to the point where she has to fight in space. I've been talking a lot about what the routes in Majikoi S contain, but I really should talk more about the general tone and feel of Majikoi S, because in many ways, it's an upgrade over the original Majikoi in terms of comedy. If you thought the original Majikoi was funny, there's some pretty hilarious additions, including Cookie having a waifu form, childhood friend bro Moro leaning more towards his cross-dressing tendencies, and even straight up bad endings to routes where Yamato can get with Miyako by accidentally consenting to her raping him. Yeah, it makes sense in context. For those who read the original Majikoi for the Kazuma family friend group dynamic interactions, there's still a decent amount of those in Majikoi S, but as this is the series' slow change up into a more waifu heavy series, I expect to see the Kazuma family be together less and less as the series goes on. Overall, technically, Majikoi S isn't completely required reading. In fact, I still think the original Majikoi is more than enough to stand on its own, having a good amount of character development, comedy, drama, and fun childhood friend character interactions. However, if you're specifically looking for an upgrade in terms of waifu options, more over-the-top hilarious goofy comedy, higher quality presentation, and generally keeping a lighter tone while still having the occasional unique dramatic moments, there's more than enough reason to check out this expansive sequel. There's around 40 hours of the ridiculous amount of content I've talked about, and almost all of it is quality. But you can still pick and choose which content you want to read if you want to treat this like a fan disc. That's what's so great about Majikoi S. In my previous video about Maji de Watashi Koishinasai's sequel, Majikoi S, I briefly made a comment about how Majikoi S introduced a lot of new heroine options, doubling the cast from the original Majikoi. However, I also noted that almost all of them did not get routes in Majikoi S specifically. Thankfully, Minato Soft rectified this issue by making one of the longest fan disc series I've ever seen for a visual novel. With the fanbase now mostly satisfied after a translation effort by fan TL group Maji TL, I'm going to use this video to make a long overdue review about Majikoi A-1 through A-5. As said earlier, the Majikoi A fan disc is pretty easily the longest fan disc series I've seen for any visual novel. Each Majikoi A number has 3 routes outside of A3, which technically has 4, and A4, which has 2 routes only. Unlike Majikoi S, where the actual routes heavily varied in length and quality, and you had to go through a kind of long new common route to meet the new characters. The Majikoi A series is a pure fan disc with each and every route selected through a character select screen. Every route is at least decently long at minimum, being 3 to 5 hours each generally. Since each route is long and I don't want to spoil anything in this video, I'm just going to very briefly give my thoughts on all 15 routes from Majikoi A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5. Starting with Majikoi A1, we have Benkei's route. This is one of the fan favorites, at least of the Western fanbase, that people have been dying to see since Majikoi S. Benkei has that messy sex hair, a very nice chill personality, and as one might expect, she has pretty big boobs, which means she's also pretty physically powerful. This route contains Yamato and Benkei's natural chemistry, but involves a pretty fun plot of Benkei being forced out of her laziness and being requested to have several fight duels throughout the route. This route is generally fun from start to finish, especially if you are previously a fan of Benkei's personality from Majikoi S. Next route for Majikoi A is Sayaka, who is actually Yukie Mayuzumi's younger sister we saw extremely briefly in Majikoi S. The best way to describe Sayaka's personality is she's basically Yukie, but without the social anxiety and the humongous boobs, and also not much of a fighter. If you just want a small, wholesome girl that doesn't take part in fighting while still having Yukie's closet pervert thoughts, you should have a fun time with Sayaka. I personally mostly like this route because it's one of the few in the Majikoi A series that still has a pretty good amount of the Kazuma family group friend interactions. The next route is Azumi, the ever so excitable dedicated maid to Hideo Kuki. This is the first of few routes that's actually a branch off of Monshiro's route from Majikoi S, where Yamato becomes a butler to Monshiro. This time though, he elects to not romance Monshiro obviously. The main conflict in this route is one of the most interesting in the whole series. As one might expect, it's pretty obvious that Azumi clearly has more romantic feelings for Hideo beyond just being his loyal, trusted servant. The reasoning of why that is shown is pretty wholesome, though her feelings are unrequited as she's 10 years older than Hideo, and Hideo already simps for Kazuko aka Wanko. This naturally creates a huge love dodecahedron of sorts. While I'm not a huge fan of Yamato going super simp mode, I quite like the progression of the route because it's something very unique we don't see much both in the Majikoi series and in romance series in general. Going into A2, the first route I'm going to talk about is Seiso's route. In Majikoi S, she was a pretty quiet, if maybe kind of boring personality. However, her role through the Bushido project showed in Majikoi S, where she straight up became a Berserker Fate series style through the unlockable Koyuki route. However, since this is Majikoi A, since the Bushido project never came to full, Yamato actually gets to romance both sides of Seiso. I would say the highlight is Seiso's other side, Zhangyu or Hegemon, who's very vulgar, direct, tomboyish, and brash. That just makes their interactions more fun. Outside of that, the route is just all about the fights, and Yamato being a support to Seiso and Hegemon. So combining that with Yamato's romance with her does make it decently interesting. The next route I'm going to be talking about is the first brand new character in the Majikoi A series, Kuki4 IS. At the way beginning of Koyuki's route, it turns out the Kazuma family robot Kuki actually has a fourth form, turning from just a regular robot into a robot waifu. Turns out this is something the Kuki family was developing all along, and while they were making their robots, they ended up making a sister to Kuki4 called Kuki4 IS, who is a lovable, arrogant, bratty, idiotic robot girl. As Kuki4 IS is related to Kuki4, there's naturally going to be more Kazuma family interactions compared to most Majikoi S and A routes, which is obviously a plus to me. Definitely consider this route if you want more robot waifus, especially ones who are arrogant idiots. The final route of Majikoi A2 is the first after story, this one being Manchuro's from Majikoi S. This is one of the shorter routes in all of Majikoi A and is just a simple, wholesome family slice of life route where Yamato, who now doubles as Manchuro's butler, but also husband, gets to spend a lot of fun times with the Kuki family, and of course, more romantic time with Manchuro. I personally like this route the most from A2 just because it's very rare to have a slice of life route that's just mostly pure family get-together wholesomeness. Moving on to Majikoi A3, we have Tsubame's route, or rather, routes. As I explained in my Majikoi S video, Tsubame actually has two branches, one where Tsubame is the dom of the relationship, while the other, she's the sub of the relationship. A3 was nice enough to have a decent length after stories for both branches. The dom after story branch was pretty interesting, but not because of Tsubame herself, but rather her parents. So you may have noticed Tsubame only lives with her dad, and her mom basically never showed up at all in Majikoi S. Well, turns out she does have a mom, and hot damn, she's one of the hottest, coolest mom side characters I've seen in any visual novel. But anyway, I like the dom route purely because it was really interesting to see Tsubame's parents attempt to get back together again after an unfortunate breakup, seeing them potentially rekindle their relationship. The after story where Tsubame is the sub is still fun enough on its own, being a more typical Majikoi comedy slice of life after story. It's not as unique or as memorable as the dom branch, but it's still pretty fun in its own right. Don't have too much else to say. Now we're going to go into maid territory as we get to choose between two battle mage. The first route we're going to be talking about is Lee, the stoic black hair battle maid. I think Lee is generally the most popular of the Majikoi battle maids for good reason. Her humor style is super unique, being based around goofy puns set in a really stoic way, but also the fact that one of her pastimes is a playing dead contest of all things. Her route also has a surprisingly decently fun story with an actual villain, something we don't see that often in Majikoi these days. The other battle maid we can go out with is Stacy, and her route is very interesting, and the fact that the route starts in one of the most unique beginnings of any Majikoi route. This route branches off the Majikoi S route where Yamato decides to be a butler for Manchuro Kuki, but it actually starts after a several year time skip where Yamato is clearly climbed up the ranks. In the present, there's still a huge competition between battle butlers and maids, and that's in full force in Stacy's route. To complement that, there's a lot of fun action scenes around Stacy because she's characterized as a gun-loving American blonde made with a really entertaining, crass, direct personality to boot. I quite like this route, though sadly it is one of the few routes past Majikoi S to have Yamato go back to his rants-like struggle-snuggle tendencies. Moving on to Majikoi A4 and what I consider possibly the most underrated Majikoi A game. Well, the first route we're talking about is Lin Chong or Rin Chu, depending on the Japanese or Chinese reading, which is relevant because this is basically the China waifu route. We got a mere glimpse of what they were like in Koyuki's route in Majikoi S, and through Rin Chu's route, we get to learn even more about the 4 to 5 main major girls who reign from the in-universe version of Majikoi's China. It's a surprisingly fun route with a lot of moving around and action, and while the main girl, Lin herself, is pretty okay for the most part, there is a secret side to her that I wasn't expecting. Majikoi A4 is the only one with two routes, with the other being Homura of the Warriors of the West. This is one of my personal favorites in the Majikoi A series because, as said earlier a few times already, this is one of the few routes to feature a lot of the Kazama family. More specifically, it relates to how all of the Kazama family members, plus Gen, take part of this temporary summer class in this West school related to the Kawakami Academy. This route is fun to see a lot of the Kazama family members befriend characters that they have pretty good chemistry with in this West school, with the personal highlight for me being Momoyo finally being humbled through the principal of the West school, finally having her take her martial arts study in a more serious, studious way. But of course, Homura herself is the highlight character, being a very fun, explosive tomboy character with a matching cannon to boot. Moving on to Majikoi A5, we have Yoshitsune's route. Of all the Bushido project girls, Yoshitsune had by far the least amount of development up to this point. Thankfully, this route is here to fix that. Not only does Yoshitsune get new sprites, not only does she get new development and the ability to shine more in fights, she also gets a brand new rival character heroine in Aki Mogami, a secret Bushido project girl who is based off one of the original male Yoshitsune's rivals. Part of Yoshitsune's route is building up both of these characters in their eventual rematch as waifu reincarnations. There's an interesting choice later on in the route. You get to choose which girl you'd prefer to side with, but obviously Yoshitsune is the star, and Aki gets her own route in Majikoi A+ disc, which we'll talk about in another video. The next route I'm going to be talking about is Takai Tachibana. For those who've been following Majikoi series up until S and A, You might be wondering and surprised who the heck this character is and why she's getting a route. She may seem minor, but is actually pretty important for the lore, as she was part of the original Big Four Divas that Yukie Mayuzumi, sometime for the original Majikoi, took her place in that role. Since then, Takai has been a hobo, not really having much to do, especially since she has an interesting quirk about she's incredibly unlucky, but has to make up for it for having super speed like the Flash. This is personally easily my favorite route in all of Majikoi A and even Majikoi S, and one of my top 5 in the whole series. I always love a good redemption story, and seeing that paired up with the underdog aspect of Takai's extreme lack of luck made her character development extremely good. The final route I'm going to be talking about in this video is Margit's afterstory, which I purposefully saved last. Some people have complained that Margit's original route in Majikoi S was a bit too shallow and Nukige-ish, and I guess this A5 story was less shallow and less Nukige. There is a plot, and it relates around Margit's elite unit from Germany, the Hound unit. We get introduced to all of Margit's direct subordinates, who are all very powerful in their own right. While they do get to show off their powers on occasion, but the route is more of a way for them getting introduced to Yamato. It gets to the point that there's eventually a choice of Yamato potentially being able to change his monogamous relationship with Margit into a polyamory relationship with the whole Hound unit, which for some reason Margit agrees to. If you like the idea of a powerful German waifu harem, then that option is here, but you can always stick to the being monogamous with Margit option. But considering there's a fan disc Hound after, it seems like at the very least this Hound harem branch is probably the more popular of the two options. And that covers all the routes really quickly from Majikoi A through A5. There are a few other fan discs that have come after, but these are the main ones, and I figured I would quickly review retrospective these, as these are pretty important and popular to the fandom. I overall quite like these Majikoi A fan discs as a whole. It's very impressive that Minato-san quite possibly has the highest heroine route count of any visual novel series I can think of, yet keeps a relatively consistent level of quality. The comedy is still pretty on point, and each route in Majikoi A is decently long with its own decent story in each of them to tell me. However, as much as I like Majikoi A, I don't quite like it as much as a whole compared to the original or even Majikoi S. I know some people like the A series most specifically because they have consistently longer and more story-heavy routes compared to Majikoi S. However, there are a handful of nitpicks about Majikoi A that just makes me not like it as much as the first two entries. The first one is the decreasing amount of the Kazuma family screen time. I know there are many Majikoi fans who are mostly here for the warrior waifu routes, and I can't blame them since there are a whole bunch of good ones. However, to me, the core of Majikoi will always be the Kazuma family close friend group interactions, and when we start to see them only in very specific routes, that always makes me incredibly sad, since that means that the routes are heavily dependent on how good the main heroine is, and their relationship with Yamato. Speaking of which, by Majikoi A, Yamato almost feels like a completely different person compared to what he was in the original Majikoi. In the original Majikoi, he was shown to be a very calculating, underhanded guy who's willing to have many social connections and is willing to outright cheat in certain situations, going so far to troll certain people, including Chris. He even had some interesting motivations about how he was getting increasingly disgruntled with Japan and wanted to be the new prime minister to change things. However, by Majikoi A, his personality feels much more watered down, feeling much more like a typical bland harem protagonist. He still does have a decent enough personality, and occasionally his underhanded genius tactics come through, but for the most part, he is just support for these warrior waifu heroines, which is fine. In fact, he has some pretty good scenes here and there, but it kind of just goes to show how the waifu pandering was at the cost of some what I consider core to the Majikoi brand. But even with these flaws, I still think Majikoi A is still quite good and well worth reading, especially if a specific warrior waifu girl appeals to you. If you were curious about my personal score ratings for Majikoi A, I would give Majikoi A-1 an 8.5 out of 10, A-2 a 7 out of 10, A-3 a 9 out of 10, A-4 an 8 out of 10, and A-5 a 6.5 out of 10. Rounding the average of these gives Majikoi A an overall 8 out of 10, which sounds about right. For reference, I gave the Majikoi S a solid 9 out of 10, and the original Majikoi is still easily my favorite visual novel of all time. I heavily recommend checking out at least one of these fan discs if there's a particular girl or route that interests you. So far, I have reviewed every single mainline Majikoi visual novel entry, all the way from the original VN to its sequel Majikoi S and its fan discs from A1 through A5. In this video, I'm going to cover my quick thoughts on every single spin-off visual novel in the Majikoi series, including any untranslated ones, starting with Shakadou-san no Jun'ai Road. This is the first Majikoi spin-off visual novel ever, originally released as a decade-old April Fool's project featuring one of the antagonists from the original game, Gyobu Shakadou. This is kind of a crossover with another Minato-developed VN, Tsujidou-san no Jun'ai Road, a comedy-focused visual novel centered on delinquent girls. Shakadou Jun'ai Road is very short, not even lasting 30 minutes. I first read it back when it released in 2013, but unfortunately, since it was designed for Windows 7, it crashes for me on Windows 11 when I try to get past the title screen. What's strange is that someone else told me that they had no issues running it on Windows 11 themselves, so maybe just my PC has a problem. Because of that, for this section of the video only, I'll have to rely on using screenshots for visuals. The premise of the VN revolves around Shakadou working at a restaurant in Enoshima, the setting for Tsujidou-san no Jun'ai Road, where he meets a 20-year-old flower girl named Sakura. The two grow closer in a lightly implied but not explicitly romantic way, all presented in the usual lighthearted Majikoi romantic comedy style. Personally, I thought this spin-off was just okay. Shakadou isn't exactly one of the more memorable Majikoi characters to me, and since the humor largely centers on the irony of him working at a random restaurant despite his darker past, there's only so much this joke can get a laugh out of me. Sakura, the heroine exclusive to this VN, is likable, and it's disappointing that she never got more screen time or a proper route in the mainline Majikoi series. The biggest letdown though is the lack of meaningful cameos from either the Majikoi or Tsujidou character casts, which once again limits the humor. Overall, Shakadou-san no Jun'ai Road is decent at best, assuming you can get it running. It's a mildly amusing 30-minute experience, but nothing particularly stand out. I'd give it around a 6 out of 10. The next spin-off I'm going to be talking about is Majikoi Spark. This is the only visual novel on this list that is completely untranslated, which is unfortunate because I found it more memorable than the Shakadou one. This time, it stars the resident lolicon June and takes place in the usual Majikoi setting of Kawakami City, with a surprisingly funny premise where June ends up befriending and taking care of a tanned-skinned lolly named Urara. Despite the concern around June, being attracted to younger-looking girls, this spinoff is entirely all ages, so thankfully, he never acts inappropriately towards her. In fact, the story is more wholesome than expected. There are still plenty of jokes about how all the characters are worried about June hanging out with a lolly-looking girl, but his relationship with Urara ends up being kinda nice. He helps her with the main conflict of the story, so them having a genuine bond was kinda surprising, since usually his attempts at talking to lollies leads to the lolly ignoring him. That said, the spinoff still heavily leans on lolicon humor, with other characters constantly calling June out and being legitimately concerned. It can be funny, but also understandably off-putting depending on your tolerance for that type of humor. If you don't find these jokes entertaining, this spinoff probably won't land for you. There's also an extra side mode featuring various Minato-branded crossover moments, but it mostly comes across as quick fan service and isn't anything especially substantial. Overall, Spark was a fairly enjoyable, short experience. I'd give it around a 7 out of 10. Now we're getting to what was intended to be the final entry in the mainline Majikoi A series, Majikoi A+ disc, which received a fan translation by Daybreak Translations, since for some reason the main Majikoi translation group, Maji TL, chose not to work on it. Despite the name, it essentially functions like a Majikoi A6, giving routes, or more accurately, sub-routes, to heroines introduced throughout the A series. However, these routes aren't very long or especially deep, so it feels more like a Majikoi A 5.5. For example, the Busho or Wusong route is based on Majikoi A4's Lin Chong route, specifically the ending where Yamato becomes Jun Linyi and gathers the 108 Stars of Destiny, or just basically makes a harem of Chinese girls. But, as expected, the focus of this route is mostly on Busho, the fire-themed girl who had limited screen time in the original Lin Chong route. That said, this is by far the shortest route in A+, and mostly feels like a 30-minute Nukige scenario. There are even what you can call bad endings, where after an early choice, Yamato can randomly have an H scene with Benkei or even the student council president Torako, or just spend time with the 10 warriors of the West in Kyushu. The Busho route is amusing, but definitely not particularly great. Aki's route fares a bit better. It branches off from Yoshitsune's route from A5, specifically the scenario where Yamato chooses Aki over Yoshitsune in the competition. While the route is roughly twice as long as Busho's route, it's still fairly short, around an hour. It has a good amount of entertaining comedy scenes, especially with how much of a teasing, lewd character Aki is. However, it still leans heavily into Nukige style content, with only one notable action scene and very little real drama, since most of that was resolved in Yoshitsune's original route. It says something when the most memorable thing for me was an amusing set of choices involving when to activate a vibrator for Aki. Overall, the route is fine for what it is. Thelma's route takes place after the polyamory branch from Margit's A5 route. While I liked the Hound unit characters individually, I wasn't particularly into how the harem aspect was handled in A5. Fortunately, Thelma's route in A+ focuses more on her trying to overcome her androphobia or fear of men. Even though the route is only about an hour long, it takes the topic somewhat seriously and handles it reasonably well by the standards of the series. Outside of that though, it's mostly light-hearted slice-of-life comedy, but Thelma's character development makes it the strongest of the first 3 routes in A+, at least to me. The real highlight of A+ is the graduation route, only unlocked after completing the first 3 routes. This acts as the closest thing to a true route for the A series, similar to how Agave functioned in the original Majikoi and how Koiki's route did in Majikoi S. As the name of the route suggests, the route centers on the 3rd years at Kawakami Academy preparing to graduate. It takes place in a universe where Yamato has somehow met all the major heroines from Majikoi S and A in a single continuity, but without focusing on romance. But as graduation approaches, a new threat appears in the form of antagonists from the Onyx Kingdom. These villains deploy robots capable of absorbing energy from powerful fighters, which reminded me of the Android saga from Dragon Ball Z. These robots are difficult to detect, can use AI to talk, and can drain energy through physical contact, making them a significant threat even to strong warriors. While the villains are interesting enough, they were clearly forced in as a convenient excuse to bring the entire cast together for a large-scale battle. The route leans heavily into fan service, giving many characters a chance to appear again, though most of the major fight scenes focus on the Kazuma family or newer heroines from S and A. The route is about 2 to 3 hours long, roughly the length of a feature film. It's enjoyable and delivers the mix of comedy and action the series is known for, but it doesn't quite reach the level of scale or depth it could have, and some characters don't get as much focus as I wish they did. Still, for what is essentially the finale to a fandisk of a fandisk, it's a satisfying send-off. Overall, Majikoi A+ isn't required reading, but I think it's easily the strongest of the Majikoi spin-offs. While the first 3 routes are nothing particularly special, the graduation route makes it worth experiencing as a final emotional note for the series. It's especially interesting since the ending implies Momoyo may have been the true heroine of the series all along. I'd give A+ a 7.5 out of 10, just shy of an 8, mainly due to its short length. As of now, the final Majikoi spin-off released in Japan is Majikoi A Ryoken or Hound After, which also got a fan translation by Daybreak Translations. This is yet another purely lighthearted fandisk with basically little to no stakes or character development. The little plot that does exist somewhat revolves around the energy-absorbing robots from the Onyx Kingdom from the graduation route, but has Yamato, Margit, and the Hound unit somehow finding about these robots and dispatching them very quickly before they become an issue worldwide. But outside of that, this is just the epitome of a nothing happens fandisk essentially. If you just wanted the pure, goofy, comedy, slice-of-life content Majikoi is known for, this fandisk is mostly that, with an emphasis on it continuing the polyamory harem branch from Margit's A5 route, aka where Yamato, thanks to Margit's approval, gets to be in a sexual relationship with all 5 of her subordinates from the Hound unit. Basically, every scene in this visual novel mostly revolves around Yamato hanging out with 1, maybe 2 of the Hound unit members at a time in funny slice-of-life scenes before eventually having sex with 1 or sometimes 2 of them at the same time. Basically kind of a Moege-Nukige mix. The comedy moments are pretty decent this time around, but just keep in mind this is, once again, another very short slice-of-life fandisk, roughly 3 hours. Despite this very likely to be the last Majikoi visual novel to ever be made, it's arguably one of the most skippable ones to date. I would only recommend it if you just really want to see more of the Hound unit since Margit herself doesn't get that much screen time, but you could also just read it if you just really like Majikoi's writing rom-com style in any scenario, basically if you're like me. I haven't mentioned it yet, but notice the overall presentation is quite a bit different from the other 3 spin-offs. The art is not by the usual Wagi, but is instead by Inoue Shinsuke, the mangaka of the Majikoi manga adaptation. Also, the background music is from the original Majikoi VN and not the OST that's been used since Majikoi S. Not sure what happened there. Hearing the OG music was nostalgic in a way, but I always preferred the S and A soundtrack, so it was really jarring to have to get used to the original BGM again. Overall though, I give Majikoi A Hound After a 7 out of 10. Skippable, but a decent enough time for me as I like the Hound unit characters as a whole. Now that just about every single major Majikoi visual novel with routes has been translated thanks to the efforts of Maji TL, Amaterasu, Daybreak, and Jast, it's time for me to make a video I've been waiting to do for a long time on this channel. A big video ranking visual novel routes from a series. And what better series to do that for my absolute favorite visual novel series, Maji de Watashi ni Koishinasai, or Majikoi. Before starting the ranking, I'll set some ground rules. First and foremost, this video will contain spoilers for all routes in the Majikoi series, so if you want to avoid them, now's the time to exit the video and read the entire series while you can. For consistency, I'll only consider visual novels where Yamato is the protagonist, so titles like Majikoi Spark and Shakadou-san no Jun'ai Road will not be included. However, I'm making a fun exception to rank the anime adaptation by Lerche, since Yamato is the main character there, and it essentially functions as a new route. As hilarious as they are, I will not include the many bad endings, even Miyako's, since those aren't really routes. Finally, my previous route ranking video was made before Majikoi A+ got its English fan translation by Daybreak Translations. This video will be updated to include those 4 routes, but since I don't want to redo the whole numbers from the original video, I'm just going to have the A+ routes have 0.5 numbers to show where they'd be. Also, since I previously ranked the anime adaptation, I figured I'd throw in ranking the manga adaptation in there for completion. And that should cover it. Let's dive into the rankings because this is going to be a long one. The Hermit Crab After and Yumiko routes from Majikoi S stand out as easily my least favorite route in the entire series. This route exemplifies the risks of extending a one-time joke beyond its natural conclusion. The original Hermit Crab route was perfectly fine and kinda dumb as a one-time joke, but its reuse in S was much less funny and nowhere near as good as the original. What does not help is that this route features Yamato's worst grape scene in the entire series, yes, even worse than Chris's. The fact that Yumiko was chosen for a route over many more well-liked characters was weird as is, especially since she's not exactly a prominent character in any Majikoi game. Using her as a victim of Yamato's extreme sexual lust for hermit crabs made it worse than Chris's route, which at least had a, arguably barely, justifiable reason for its grape scene. If I were to ever reread Majikoi S, this would be the one route I'd absolutely skip no matter what. I'm not opposed to anime original content and adaptations of visual novels. In fact, I like a few of the anime original moments from the rewrite anime and even the Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works anime. However, I really dislike the Majikoi anime adaptation because not only is it 90% original content, it turns Majikoi into a generic harem romance that only retains faint traces of Majikoi's comedy and features heavily simplified versions of the original characters. There are also ridiculous elements like Takai having robot arms, which is completely out of character. I found a few jokes here and there that were kind of funny, but the charm of the original Majikoi was mostly entirely absent. The fact that the anime also goes for a lazy no heroine wins harem ending is like a pile of whipped diarrhea on a shit cake. Pretty much the only reason it doesn't rank at the very bottom for me is at least some parts were mildly entertaining, unlike Yumiko's route, which was not. Umeko's route from the original Majikoi was a major letdown. A lot of people were hyped for this badass teacher route, but it was pure disappointment, showing that apparently all you need is some alcohol and a bit of sucking up, who's supposed to be this powerful femdom with a whip. Not only that, but the route was incredibly short, with basically zero character development or cool fight scenes. If you're looking for teacher routes, there are far better options in slice-of-life visual novels like Miharu's route in A Sky Full of Stars Fine Days, which has great character development, or Destiny Star Girlfriend, which was at least kind of longer and had more amusing slice of life. Margit's route in Majikoi S is sadly one I found pretty boring. For what it's worth, I already consider Margit the most overrated Majikoi character by far. I don't understand how she constantly tops popularity polls in Japan and has a bunch of fans in the West. There are other big boobed German characters who are way more memorable in terms of personality and fighting prowess. That said, it says something when even the Margit fans I know are disappointed by this route, mainly because it's the closest the series gets to a pure Nukige or sex-focused route. Sure, Majikoi S has plenty of H scenes, but Margit's route felt especially shallow and sex-heavy, even compared to her sequel routes. Basically, we got a boring route with, in my opinion, a really boring heroine. Chris's route being this high might surprise some people, but honestly, it started with a lot of promise. It kicks off strong with an intriguing opposites attract dynamic, as Chris's justice-oriented personality amusingly contrasts with Yamato's pragmatic trickery. Unfortunately, the route derails when Chris's father drama begins, and Yamato's infamous grape scene and manipulation of Chris sour the latter half of the route for me, which could have been a great way to explore the theme of dealing with overprotective fathers. The way Yamato gets Chris to join his side is incredibly disgusting, and it does not help that there's an optional H scene where Margit could join for a threesome, making it hard to take the second half of this route seriously at all. It's extremely unfortunate since, unlike many people, I actually kind of like Chris. Yoshitsune's route from Majikoi A-5 seems to be popular among fans, but I'll be honest, it did nothing for me. It sucks because I actually liked Yoshitsune the most out of the Bushido Plan heroines, or at least I did when they were introduced in S. She was basically Yukie but with social anxiety replaced by third-person speech. However, her and Yamato's romance development was just really boring. Yoshi just doesn't have any funny gimmicks or interesting traits to develop throughout the route. Despite being decently long, it felt like any development that was supposed to happen just didn't resonate with me. What doesn't help is that this route introduces a brand new character, Akiyogami, who is supposedly there the whole time but is thrown in this late in the Majikoi A series. I like the idea of her being a rival to Yoshitsune, but the route ended up splitting time between the already weak chemistry between Yamato and Yoshitsune and introducing Aki, trying to create some new relationship dynamics. While I overall actually kind of liked Aki, her inclusion was a net negative since it split time between the three characters in a bad way, and the relationships between them just didn't feel that strong by the end. As a result, I just didn't really care about the final bout between Yoshi and Aki, despite the fact that they finally used animated fight scenes for the first time since Majikoi S. It's an extremely disappointing route for me. Chika's route from the original Majikoi is surprisingly unique in that it has the main protagonist actually go out with the basic preppy popular girl you probably remember from high school, the one trying way too hard to be popular with her looks and everything. It's not the most standout route, but at least it's nice and short. I actually kind of like Chika since she's one of the few non-fighting heroines in the entire series, but yeah, that's basically all she has going for her. Takai's route in Majikoi S serves primarily as a teaser for her full route in Majikoi A-5, while very short, introduces the theme of luck, contrasting Takai's bad luck with Cap's good luck. While the route is pretty wholesome, it's super short and basically just a much worse, incomplete version of Takai's route in A-5. So honestly, it's pretty skippable since her A-5 route covers the same ground but better and longer. Mayo's route from the original Majikoi is similar to Chika's in that she's one of the few non-fighting heroines in the series, which makes her stand out in a way. I'd say she's just a little bit more likable than Chika since she has that unique lolly who wants to be everyone's big sister trope, which is amusing enough, and she actually is the big sister in her own family. But otherwise, it's just another short and sweet normal girl route. I guess there's some discomfort with all the comments about her being a lolly, but since it's short, it was at least easy to get through. The Busho or Wu Song route from A+ was kind of okay for what it was. Since it's only a 30-minute after story based on the polyamory ending to Lin Chang's A4 route, there was never going to be a lot to it. The main joke is that it focuses on Busho and how she gets more firepower through sex with Yamato. It was amusing, but the only real thing the route had going for it. The only other thing that stood out to me is that this is basically the only route that comes close to being a Toriko route, and even then, it's just a really optional 3-minute at most quickie bad ending with her or with Benkei. Overall, Busho's route was mildly amusing for what it was, but pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Gakudo's route from the original Majikoi is kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, I like that the original Majikoi is one of the few visual novels with non-romance bro routes, and sometimes I find Gakudo's goofy comments about sucking at getting girls pretty funny. However, this route also shows him at his best and worst, with some of his most cringeworthy, desperate jokes about wanting girls. He does make up for it with a cool moment where he saves Chika, a nice call forward to when he does something similar in Agave. But yeah, outside of being one of the few bro routes I can think of in visual novels, its focus on the typical perverted bro side character, just with muscles, makes this route not as good as I'd hoped. Chris's afterstory in Majikoi S is an improvement over her original route, but that's not saying much. While we thankfully don't have to see any more grape scenes, I'm still not a fan of how Yamato and Chris got together to begin with, and they never really healthily apologized or reconciled for what happened. The story still seems to treat what Yamato did to start the relationship as an overall positive. Outside of some typical amusing opposites attract comedic dialogue between Yamato and Chris, literally the only memorable thing about this after story is that it's one of the few scenes where Yamato gets completely femdomed by a girl, by none other than Chris herself, which feels like the closest thing to payback for her getting graped in her original route. Otherwise, yeah, pretty easily the worst afterstory in S. The premium girl Kosugi route from Majikoi S is definitely unique, and that is one of the most interesting ways of accessing her route, visiting the tutorial 10 times. Then you get more scenes, including her H scenes, by visiting the tutorial room another 10 times. Thinking about it now, it's just super weird that the Majikoi series in general even have tutorials, since I'd like to think most people picking up this series know what a visual novel is. However, the fact that it's leveraged to create a really goofy but super short route makes it enjoyable enough in that regard. That said, the premium girl, Kosugi herself, is a very forgettable heroine. She kind of just uses the same premium joke over and over. At the very least, this route gives her some unique blushing sprites, but if Kosugi had a more memorable personality, this route could have been higher. Margaret's after-story route in Majikoi A-5 is one I consider an improvement over her original route in S, but once again, that's not saying much. The main thing that makes it stand out compared to the original is the introduction of Margaret's subordinates, the Hound unit. All 5 members have much more memorable personalities and powers compared to Margaret herself, in my opinion. Whether interacting together or individually with Yamato, they're pretty amusing. However, the main thing I don't like about this route is how it forcefully introduces a weird optional polyamory route, with Margaret being one of the most open to accepting this polyamory before even Yamato himself, which is super weird. Then there's the whole thing about where one of the main girls, Lisa, legitimately reverse grapes Yamato before he retaliates, leading Lisa and the rest of the girls to fall for him, or I guess his dick. It sucks because I like the characters and the humor here, but I just don't like how the heroines were introduced to Yamato or the polyamory option. You could go full monogamy, but at that point, Yamato has been reverse graped and flirted with by all the other hounds, and the sequel Fandisc Hound After clearly shows that fans prefer this polyamory ending, so I don't know, this route is okay I guess, but I have to really turn my brain off. Moro's route from the original Majikoi showcases both the best and worst aspects of a bro route in the series. On one hand, it attempts to cover character development and depth related to Moro's insecurities about being the boring normal guy in a group of characters with much more standout traits. While it addresses how he feels and offers some nice development, I thought the resolution was not as great as I'd hope. It felt like a typical cheesy, yeah, you're our friend moment and all that, but since the route was short just like every other side route, I just didn't really feel that fulfilled. I could see why some people really like this route, but I can also understand why others might not, as Moro can get pretty whiny in this specific route. Still, I can empathize with him to some degree. Aki's route in A+ is similar to Wu Song's in that it's just an after-story branch, this time stemming from Yoshitsune's A5 route, more specifically the branch where you choose to side with Aki. I ranked Yoshitsune's route pretty low myself, but that's mostly because I thought it was surprisingly boring for how long and supposedly epic it was. Aki's route isn't anything special either, but at least it's short, only around an hour at most, and it focuses on the amusing side of Aki herself, her basically being low-key Miyako 2.0, to the point where there's a whole sequence of choices where you can try to turn on a vibrator while she's in social situations, and she actually enjoys it. Otherwise, the route was entertaining enough, but nothing more than that. It did at least had a quick fight with Mooks and a quick competition with Yoshitsune, making it more memorable than Wu Song's route in A+ at least. Io's route from Majikoi S is the definition of short and sweet. It basically gives the impression that if you want to rizz up a baseball fangirl, all you have to do is take her to a baseball game for the team she likes, cheer alongside her, and you're literally in. Half joking aside, Io herself is a decently likable character, and I'm glad she had some solid comedy here. I'm just kind of sad they left out her relationship with Yukie for the most part. Thelma's route in A+ is the best of the non-graduation routes, largely because it's the only one that actually had a real character arc. I wasn't super into how Yamato ended up in his polyamory relationship with Margaret's subordinates, the Hound unit in A5, so I was honestly glad this route was instead a more focused story about Thelma overcoming her fear of men, using Gakuto of all people as the basis for helping her get past it. Having characters like Kyojin and Lu show up to help is a nice touch, since it makes relatively minor characters useful in a route centered on a relatively minor heroine. Overall, it's a half a decent route that's mostly held back by the fact that it's only about an hour long and exists as an afterstory to a polyamory branch I don't really care that much about. The Cookie 4 IS route from Majikoi A2 is one I want to like more than I do, but it has one major flaw. I really don't vibe with unironic romances and especially sex scenes with robot waifus. Maybe some people like the idea of dating a humanized robot girl, but I just can't get behind it. It sucks because I think IS herself is decently funny, an overly arrogant loudmouth who gets made fun of. There's also a whole plot about her being related to a line of kooky secret killer robots and being the sister of the Kazama family's purple cookie robot, which means this is one of the few Majikoi S and A routes with a decently big Kazama family focus. One thing I think is a huge flaw in the Majikoi series as a whole is featuring less and less of the Kazama family over time. Otherwise, the plot of the IS route itself is completely fine and funny. Once again, I just don't fuck with fucking robots. The Tsubame route from Majikoi S is one I have mixed to positive feelings about. On one hand, I actually think the interactions between Yamato and Tsubame are pretty fun, especially since they're noted to be really similar with their teasing personalities. I also like that, for once, this is the route where Momoyo is actually beaten in a tournament-style setting one-on-one. The idea of the Dom plus sub branches is pretty interesting and leads to decently long branches. However, all the pros I just mentioned have some unfortunate cons. Because of this Dom sub branch, I find Yamato and Tsubame's interactions somewhat inconsistent after the branch starts. While Tsubame getting a memorable win over Momoyo is nice, the fact that it was essentially done through cheating doesn't sit right with me. Yes, I know the story highlights this. All this really does is make Tsubame herself inconsistently likable to me, which in turn brings down the overall quality of the route. The original Hermit Crab route in the original Majikoi works best as a goofy but dumb one-time joke. Yamato's obsession with hermit crabs was pretty funny on its own, but having to make choices to only go home all the time and getting attached to them to the point of lust was kind of an amusing gag. Sadly, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that there's an after story for this in Majikoi S kind of brings down this specific one. The Agave after Itagaki harem branch from Majikoi S is decently fun in the sense of a what-if scenario where the main character succumbs to Stockholm Syndrome and rizzes up attractive girls who kidnapped him during a very serious plot. I thought the route mostly worked because of Tatsuko's weird affection towards Yamato, but even the other two sisters had their fun moments. While the three Itagakis are likable enough, I just don't think they're that special compared to a lot of so many of the other Majikoi series' heroines. As far as post-Agave goes, I'd rather stick to the other branch that's all about the Kazuma family. This Itagaki branch still offers decent slice of life and comedy elements, but the Itagaki characters are the epitome of mid-tier to me, making this route readable but ultimately forgettable. The Tsubame sub after route in Majikoi A-3 is a typical lighthearted slice of life route in the Majikoi series. I would say it's an improvement over the original S route since we don't have to deal with Tsubame's inconsistent likability. It just focuses on goofy jokes and decent interactions between the main couple. Outside of that, there's not much special about this route, but there's not much wrong with it either. It's amusing, does its job, and isn't too long since the after story takes a lighthearted approach, focusing on slice of life elements. This version of Tsubame is presented as less problematic than her Dom counterpart, aligning more closely with traditional Genki girl tropes. While this makes the route feel somewhat generic, it still offers enjoyable interactions with various characters to make it worth going back to eventually. The Seiso Hegemon route from Majikoi A-2 is yet another decent but not spectacular route in this series. The idea of dating someone with a dual personality is ultimately a better version of what they did in the Yoshitsune route, where we got closer to Yoshi and Aki, since we've had time to get to know both Seiso and Hegemon throughout Majikoi S and A1. Now, I don't think Seiso or Hegemon are in my top tier of Majikoi heroines. In fact, both are relatively equal in quality in the mid-tier. However, there are fun enough interactions between Yamato and both sides of her personality, and that helps that I consider Hegemon a much more likable version of Momoyo. That's not saying much though, because I don't really like Momoyo all that much. Outside of that though, this route is yet another Majikoi A route where Yamato is an emotional guide and coach for the strong girl, and that's about it. Momoyo's afterstory in Majikoi S is a decent enough follow-up to her original route, since the main event of the Kawakami War shows that Momoyo needs to think about life beyond just fighting. Outside of a few amusing jokes like how Momoyo is afraid of ghosts since those are the only things she can't physically beat up, and of course the self-insert fantasy of overpowering a much stronger woman in bed, I think this afterstory is decently fun but nothing special. The Monshiro after route in Majikoi A-2 is in my opinion the standout route in A-2. Focusing on Yamato's life as Monshiro's husband and butler, this route excels at presenting wholesome slice-of-life scenes with the Kuki family. While it has no major plot progression or twists, its strength lies in its ability to create a sense of comfort and warmth. This approach showcases Majikoi's proficiency in portraying slice-of-life scenarios. Another short but sweet route, not amazing, but cute and wholesome, and sometimes that's all I need. The Ryokan or Hound after fan disc, despite having almost no story and being almost purely a slice-of-life comedy and H scenes, manages to be entertaining by returning to Majikoi's comedic roots and focusing on the more interesting Hound characters compared to Margit. In a way, I consider it the best of the worst of the Margit routes since it has the least amount of Margit. Since the characters are already in a polyamorous relationship, this fandisc can just focus on their interactions, which makes the route consistently entertaining. There's a part with a pseudo-dating sim parody element that I thought was one of the more amusing parts of the modern Majikoi routes. Outside of that though, this route is the definition of decent but nothing special, definitely enough to entertain me. I might reread it in the future, but with no major character development, an art style that feels off compared to most of the Majikoi series, and a polyamorous relationship that I'm not super big on, it's not one of my favorites. Cap's route from the original Majikoi is easily my favorite side route. It's the only route I can think of that's pure Kazuma family wholesomeness, where they just hang out and even go to a casino, emphasizing Cap's incredible luck. Cap is generally a static character, and the only thing he lacks compared to the other two bro routes is character development because he has none. But who cares? This route is fun and wholesome, and I'm always happy to enjoy the Kazuma family's hilarious slice of life moments together. Lin's route from Majikoi A-4 was the one I ended up liking a lot more than I expected. Before A-4, we got minimal screen time for the Chinese Majikoi girls, maybe an S and one or two other A routes. However, I thought all the Chinese girls, both main heroines and antagonists, had surprisingly memorable designs, personalities, and fights. While I've mentioned I'm not super into polyamorous relationships, I actually liked how this route made the pseudo-polyamory work with Yamato's role among his relationships with the other Chinese girls. Lin herself is unfortunately probably the least memorable China girl in terms of personality, which sucks since it's supposed to be her route. However, it was her random yandere moment that definitely made her character stand out quite a bit more. I was personally surprised they didn't even lead hard into this angle and instead just gave her and Yamato time to shack up together before getting back into the plot. Overall, Lin's route was surprisingly fun, not one of my all-time favorites, but one I definitely would not mind rereading. The Tsubame Dom after route from Majikoi A3 is ranked pretty high for a very weird reason. As I stated earlier, I'm not super into how the Dom aspect was handled because it makes Tsubame's personality and relationship with Yamato inconsistently likable. However, it's one thing that definitely makes this route stand out among all the other Tsubame routes is the focus on her parents. More specifically, this is the only route where we get to see Tsubame's mom, and I have to say, she's way more attractive, likable, and interesting than Tsubame herself. The fun part of this route was seeing how Tsubame's parents separated and how Yamato and Tsubame help get them back together. It's a surprisingly fun and unique concept that I wish more visual novel routes would tackle. It's just a shame that the actual main couple who the route is supposed to be about ended up being pretty whatever. Monchiro's original route from Majikoi S is ranked high mostly because of the crazy world building around the Kuki family. I liked exploring the wild politics involving the Kuki family butlers and maids, as well as the secret fighting competition where they try to one-up each other to gain higher ranks in this wealthy family. As for Monchiro herself, she's probably the most likable lolly in the series since she's surprisingly wholesome in a family that's all about extreme arrogance. That said, I was pretty uncomfortable with how they confirmed she was a student who skipped grades, making it so Yamato, technically a butler too, would eventually have sex with someone definitely not of high school age. I really like the Kuki family dynamics and exploring Monchiro's insecurities about being technically adopted into the family, which were surprisingly relatable. As a minor spoiler for this list, this route is important for setting up a few other routes higher, so I have to give the original Monchiro route props for building up all of those. The Agave after Kazuma family branch from Majikoi S is kinda tough to separate from the Itagaki branch due to a shared, really short common branch. However, I decided to pair that original common branch with the Kazuma family branch since that one is definitely shorter. I mostly enjoyed seeing the result of having Gen be a huge part of the Kazuma family hangouts and a non-serious plot, because he's definitely someone who should have been in the Kazuma family much earlier. That makes this branch much more special when he's involved. That said, the route itself isn't particularly deep. It features a lot of goofy slice-of-life moments with the main Kazuma family, which is always one of my favorite things in the series. The main appeal, I guess, is the threesome H-scene you can have with Yamato's perverted childhood friends Momoyo and Miyako, who apparently became even more lustful for Yamato after he got captured for some reason. It does make for a fairly amusing H-scene, but other than that, this route isn't super deep, just more Kazuma family slice of life, which I'll never complain about, especially now that Gen's around. Benkei's route from Majikoi A-1 stands out as a relatively solid Majikoi fandisc route overall, and I overall consider it the best route involving one of the Bushido Plan girls. It's interesting because Benkei is popular, but I don't love her as much as other people do, but she is fairly likable, and I would say her chemistry with Yamato is probably the best among the Bushido Plan girls. It helps that Yamato and Benkei have hung out a lot in the Lazy Club since Majikoi S, and that carries over to this eventual romance. The main event of this route is a lot of characters challenging Benkei to fight since she's supposedly one of the stronger characters in the series, but is super lazy and only fights when she feels like she needs to. With Yamato as her emotional coach and guide, she's able to take on more fights, many of which are entertaining and, of course, lets her get closer to Yamato. While many Majikoi routes follow this formula of Yamato being emotional support for the powerful heroine, this is still one of the better ones purely because of Benkei's chemistry with Yamato and her overall likability. Kokoro's route from Majikoi S is one I simultaneously really like, but I'm also kind of disappointed with. As for what I really like, it's easily one of the funniest routes in Majikoi S or A. I already thought Kokoro was one of the better heroines outside the Kazuma family, even in the original Majikoi, so I'm glad she at least got a route in the series. I liked how her extreme arrogance eventually leads to her getting kicked out of Class 2S and her having a redemption arc of sorts to be less of a bitch to the people she used to look down on because of her higher status. Normally, I'm not into how Yamato treats the girls in the series at times, but considering how much of a bitch Kokoro usually is, Yamato having to slap her in the ass to put her in line was simultaneously really funny and honestly something she deserved. The romance itself was decently cute, but ultimately became a relatively shallow Nukige-style romance after Kokoro resolves her Class 2S fallout. Another disappointment was that in Yukie's route, there's a super short, bad ending where Kokoro asks Yamato to be her butler. The fact that this subplot or hell, anything related to Kokoro's heritage was never brought up or developed was definitely the biggest letdown of this route. Unfortunately, Kokoro never got a follow-up route in Majikoi A like some others, so we'll never likely see what's so great about the Fushikawa family and their powerful judo. Yukie's afterstory in Majikoi S is one I like, as it focuses on her journey towards independence from Matsukaze, her original constant companion. It explores new friendships with characters like Io and Kokoro, expanding Yukie's social circuit beyond the Kazuma family. The story maintains Yukie's closet pervert trait, which is definitely a key part of her humor. While definitely very solid, this afterstory does not stand out as exceptional among others. It provides a satisfactory continuation of Yukie's character development and is generally quite funny and wholesome, but just doesn't really push any interesting boundaries or offer surprising twists. The graduation route in A+ is definitely a solid ending to the series. Well, until Hound After came along a few years later. But I basically consider graduation the true ending to the whole series. I thought the killer robots from the Onyx Kingdom were a fun excuse to bring basically the entire cast of Majikoi A back for one big battle. And I liked how their energy absorbing powers were a clear reference to the androids from Dragon Ball Z. While it was nice to have a lot of these Majikoi A characters fighting again, it thankfully did not leave out what I still consider the best part of the Majikoi series, the Kazuma family. More specifically, the original 5 main heroines all get their moments here. The route just has a solid mix of comedy and reasonably paced fight scenes between various characters. That said, while this route is fun, it is not quite on the level of the previous true routes, Agave and even Koyuki's route, mostly because the Onyx Kingdom just sort of came out of nowhere as opposed to Koyuki's route, which at least had all of Majikoi S to build up the Bushido project. Still, the emphasis on these final battles and the third year's graduating was a nice emotional touch. The graduation route in general was a fun way to end the series, but was only a few hours long, so just a bit too short to be any higher. Homura's route from Majikoi A4 was, in my opinion, the slight standout of this particular fan disc. A significant strength of this route is the heavy involvement of the Kazuma family, which is easily my favorite part of the Majikoi cast. It's such a shame that this is one of the few routes in the later Majikoi routes with such extensive Kazuma family interactions. One unique aspect of Homura's route is the interactions between the Kazuma family and the 10 Warriors of the West. These interactions provide fresh dynamics and relationships to explore, expanding the series' character network in interesting ways. The route successfully balances humor with wholesome moments, maintaining what I consider a great equilibrium of Majikoi's humor and wholesomeness. Homura herself stands out as one of the better characters introduced in Majikoi S. Her archetype, a blunt, petite tomboy, showcases the series' ability to create appealing and distinctive personalities, especially around her love for explosions. Wanko's afterstory from Majikoi S offers a heartwarming continuation of her character arc from the original visual novel, focusing on her journey to become a nutritionist. Honestly, my thoughts and opinions on it are almost exactly the same as Yukie's afterstory, with the main thing putting Wanko's route slightly ahead being that I was just a bit more interested in seeing Wanko's journey to becoming a nutritionist a little bit more over Yukie discarding Matsukaze for good. Regardless, funny and wholesome afterstory fandisk as per usual. Azumi's route from Majikoi A-1 is one of the most unique in the series. As a long-awaited storyline for a character present since the original Majikoi, it explores Azumi's complex feelings for Hideo and her attempts at personal growth. The route features a love dodecahedron of sorts, which leads to amusing relationship and dialogue progression. Seeing Azumi dial down her crazy fangirl personality to something more traditionally cute was actually really nice. The route takes a bold narrative risk with a 10-year time skip, during which Yamato goes into full simp mode and persistently pursues Azumi. I think this part of the story gets a lot of love, and admittedly, it was really unique when I first read it. However, in retrospect, I don't like how it feels hypocritical to show Yamato as a great simp for waiting for a decade, even though Miyako has done the same thing and that's seen as toxic. With how much I've seen legitimate real-life sipping from real guys, aka them putting girls on a pedestal, it just now makes me dislike it when I see it done to this degree in VNs. That said, I do have to give this route props for at least trying something unique, definitely something I have not seen in any other romance visual novel. Miyako's afterstory in Majikoi S was easily my favorite of the original heroines' afterstories, though admittedly with some personal bias. In the original Majikoi, Miyako was my favorite main heroine. Back then, it was easy for me to be won over by openly perverted girls, especially childhood friends. Her original route focused on the toxic nature of her relationship with her childhood friends, and seeing the fruits of her character development in this afterstory was really nice. She still remains a pervert, but now approaches life in a much healthier way. She now establishes boundaries, interacts with people outside the friend group, and has now just overall developed as a person greatly. On a personal level, this extremely cute romantic CG showing that her devotion to Yamato was finally rewarded was generally wholesome to see as a once big fan of hers. Miyako's afterstory beautifully illustrated her character progression from an unhealthily clingy character to someone with more balanced relationships and self-awareness. Koyuki's route from Majikoi S, for better or for worse, is probably one of the most subversive routes in the whole series, focusing much less on romance and more on overarching plot elements. Acting as the true route of Majikoi S of sorts, it reveals significant backstory elements about the true nature of the Bushido plan that was built up throughout Majikoi S. In terms of the quality of over-the-top fights, this is easily top 3 route in the series for that, featuring consistently crazy amounts of battles. It's quite fun to watch, especially with the team-ups involving newly introduced antagonists and previous characters we knew getting brainwashed. Seeing Momoyo fight her one rival character equal to her strength in space was the icing on the cake. However, the route has a major flaw. Despite this route technically being called Koyuki's route, she barely matters. While it was nice to see an alternative timeline where she actually gets accepted into the Kazuma family, something the original Agave route provided depth to, it was sadly just merely used as a backdrop for this Bushido plan narrative, which was kind of a strange choice. As a result, we never get to see interesting development between Yamato and Koyuki, which is disappointing since Yamato's interactions with his other childhood friend love interests were still actually quite good. The manga adaptation of Majikoi is thankfully a lot better than the anime adaptation, though still not perfect. It's basically what I'd hoped the anime adaptation would be, a mostly straight adaptation of the original VN's common route and Momoyo's route. Unlike the anime, it starts at the very beginning of the VN and goes all the way to the good end of Momoyo's route while actually adapting it pretty well. The manga version of the Kawakami War also gets a good 5 to 6 chapters to show the hilarious fun and complexities of said war, instead of the anime scrunching everything into one episode. It was especially nice to see Otome from Suyo Kiss, one of the original Big 4 members, who did not have a sprite or CG in the original VN version of the Kawakami War, to get a neat visual appearance in the manga's final fight. On top of that, you get all the benefits of a manga adaptation, like actually seeing Yamato on page the whole time, which is notable since he's a VN protagonist with actual personality. There's jokes from the VN that gain extra visual impact in manga form, and there's some fun manga original jokes that would fit right into the VN. That said, because this is only a 6-volume manga with around 30 chapters, it has to skip a bunch of jokes and minor scenes from the VN, or compress and rearrange events to get to the main conflicts more efficiently. It does make sense for the medium, but it also makes me sad as a huge Majikoi fan who just wanted to see all the visual novel scenes in manga form. While expected, being a manga adaptation also means losing some of the biggest strengths of the VN, so no full color visuals, no voice acting, and no music that would normally elevate the jokes and action scenes. But even with those issues, if you just wanted to see the common route and Momoyo route in manga form, this manga adaptation is still a pretty solid way to experience them. I'd say it's also a good way for beginners to VNs who are manga heavy readers to get a taste of the Majikoi series, especially if they're not sure if they want to commit to a 50+ hour visual novel. Lee's route is generally considered the fan favorite of Majikoi A3, with Lee herself standing out as one of the best new characters introduced in Majikoi S. Her unique personality, blending seriousness with goofiness, particularly her obsession with puns and playing dead, makes her one of the most consistently great characters in my eyes. In addition to having solid slice-of-life comedy scenes, there's even a goofy tournament centered around people playing dead. This is one of the few routes that features an actual villain, which is a surprising rarity in Majikoi A. The villain ties to Lee's past and has a good progression leading to his defeat. Overall, Lee's route was just really fun from start to finish. I don't have too much to complain about this route, I just slightly prefer what every other route above this does over hers. Stacy's route from Majikoi A-3 stands out as highly entertaining, incorporating unique elements that set it apart from other routes. The focus on the battle butler/maid competition, previously introduced in Monshiro's original route, is emphasized even more here, especially since the route starts after a time skip. At this point, Yamato and basically every other character besides Monshiro are adults, which is very unique for the series and something I really like. The unusual time skip and the interesting twist involving Yamato and Chika of all people brief relationship at the beginning add to the intriguing uniqueness. I also just generally really like Stacy as a battle maid character. She serves as a parody of loud, brash Americans, with her appeal being enhanced by her use of English cursing and gun-based fight scenes, making all of her combat sequences quite fun to watch. Unfortunately, the route is slightly brought down by the execution of a few of its H scenes, one being a required one with Sheila, I'm not even sure why she was given an H scene, and another where Yamato goes back to his typical graping behavior. Outside of those flaws though, overall, Stacy's route is one of the most consistently enjoyable experiences I've had in the Majikoi A series. Sayaka's route from Majikoi A-1, while not exceptional in terms of plot or character development, stands out for different reasons. Sayaka herself is essentially a version of her sister Yukie without the social anxiety or fighting prowess. Instead, her route shines through its down-to-earth, wholesome nature. The route places a heavy focus on the Kazuma family interactions, offering enjoyable slice-of-life elements that personally resonated more than many other routes for me, especially in the A fan discs. It demonstrates the familial connection between Sayaka and Yukie as she shares her sister's closet pervert personality, which proves quite amusing. While many might not rank this route as highly as I do, as I've stated multiple times, any route with more Kazuma family goodness is a guarantee to make things rank higher. The route's wholesome atmosphere and the family dynamics, including the not too stressful conflict with the Mayuzumi dad, make it engaging, even if Sayaka herself isn't a particularly standout character. She does still remain likable enough to carry the route's charm, making it a very enjoyable experience for those who just want relaxed, wholesome character interactions over complex plot developments or over-the-top fights. Yukie's route from the original Majikoi stands out as an all-around excellent addition to the series. Yukie is one of the most relatable characters, having the common goal of wanting to make 100 friends, but being too socially anxious and awkward to do so. Her funny Matsukaze serves as both a crutch and a source of character development in her route. The story also features an engaging Battle Royale style competition, creating unique team dynamics with the main group we follow, including Yamato, Kokoro, and even Prime Minister Norio Wakamoto. Yukie's character development shines as she learns to rely less on Matsukaze, culminating in a heartwarming friendship with Io. While the route contains the series' worst Momoyo moment, Yukie's presence largely mitigates this flaw. Overall, Yukie's route is easily a standout experience in the Majikoi series. Takai's route emerges as the standout of Majikoi A5 and is easily the best route past the original Majikoi for me. Her background as an original member of the Big Four Devas adds significant depth to her character, tying her more closely to the core Majikoi lore. The route presents a compelling underdog story, showcasing excellent character development as Takai, with Yamato's help, overcomes her persistent bad luck. The progression of her story is wholesome, indicating a successful blend of character growth and emotional resonance. The climax, which showcases Takai's super speed powers, provides an exciting payoff to her character arc. The balance of character development and action exemplifies the best aspects of the Majikoi series to me. The only notable flaw is its slightly shorter length and more rushed pacing compared to the original Majikoi VN Heroine routes. This could be a result of the constraints of the A series format, or just the shift in storytelling approach for the additional fan disc routes. This route is additionally enhanced by significant screen time for Torako, revealing her secretly wholesome personality and making me more frustrated that she never received a real route on her own. Miyako's route from the original Majikoi is often seen as polarizing within the fandom, and it's easy to understand why. While Miyako is generally liked, I think, her character could put people off if they dislike a toxic, perverted girl whose behavior benefits from double standards, such as her clear sexual harassment of Yamato being excused because it's hot when girls do it. Her route does introduce some unique elements to the series, such as front-loading all the H scenes, which makes sense given Miyako's extremely perverted nature and Yamato's low-key perversion. However, Miyako's original route is by far the most melodramatic in the entire series. It is the only one to deal with the potential breakup and a rift in the Kazuma family's dynamic. While some may find this annoying since the group's wholesome and funny interactions are the core part of the series, I actually appreciated it. This game does not shy away from showing how toxic Miyako's relationship with her friends was, and having to develop her by addressing these flaws made for a well-done story. It can be hard to watch at times, but I believe that was intentional. One of the most surprising highlights of this route is Miyako's relationship with Chris. Despite being at odds by the end of the common route, they became incredibly close in Miyako's story. This irony adds depth to both characters and ends up making Chris a lot better than she is in her own route. On a personal note, I think Yamato and Miyako are perfect together due to their equally ridiculous levels of perversion, ensuring they don't end up harassing others. Momoyo's route from the original Majikoi demonstrates that a great route doesn't require liking the title heroine in question. While I'm generally not a fan of Momoyo, I don't outright hate her. In the original Majikoi, I thought she was an excessive bully even to her own friends without reason. I genuinely believe she should have been removed from the group if not for her character development in Majikoi S and A. The route takes a fun approach by featuring one of the series' top 3 fight events in the series for me, the Kawakami War. The premise of Yamato having to prove himself romantically to Momoyo was engaging and, thankfully, meant less direct interaction with her in this route. The war showcases the best of Majikoi's action writing, presenting goofy, over-the-top fights balanced with surprising strategic depth between Yamato and Toma. The battle's climax, featuring the big 4 divas fighting each other, was particularly exciting. The final victory, not directly revolving around beating Momoyo, was a clever narrative touch. Additionally, the route being one of the few to potentially have a bad ending added interesting complexity to the challenge of romancing someone like Momoyo. The only downside is that this route indirectly led to the anime adaptation, which is easily one of my least favorite anime adaptations of visual novels. Wanko's route from the original Majikoi is considered one of, if not the best routes in the whole series, and for good reason. It's the only route in the series that commits to being a true Nakige-like tearjerker. Wanko is already one of the most universally liked characters. She's an energetic girl who is generally wholesome, and all she wants to do is stand next to her big sister as an equal, especially since she is thankful for the Kawakami Dojo for adopting her after she never grew up with her real family. Her route features a shonen training arc that gives the impression it will follow a typical shonen fight where she'll rise to the occasion and achieve her dream. However, after a brief tournament arc, that expectation is subverted, leading to one of the most emotional scenes in the entire series. I've seen a few detractors regarding this part. Some blame Chris or Miss Kishido or Miss Chivalry in the jazz translation for screwing Wanko over, but I did not mind this as there was plenty of foreshadowing. It was clear she was never going to be ready due to her latent potential not being that high, and everyone in the dojo, Momoyo included, struggled to break the news to her. Having that come to light through a loss in a tournament ended up being a net positive for me. While the whole situation with 3 guys confessing to her while she's down was a little cheesy, it just shows how lovable Wanko is, which makes perfect sense. Of course, she ends up with Yamato, but the real saving grace of this route is how she bounces back into a very different career as a nutritionist. This route proves that Wanko is not actually stupid. She's just incredibly single-mindedly devoted to her goals. Once she devotes herself to studying, suddenly she starts getting good grades. Although we don't get to see the fruits of her labor until her sequel route in Majikoi S, what we do see in this route is amazing. It showcases a great personal journey that could resonate with anyone who has a goal that they are unable to reach and just needs to bounce back into something more realistic. A nice icing on the cake is that Suguru, my favorite side character in the original visual novel because of how extreme they parodied 2D loving otaku, had what might be my favorite comedy scene where he attempted to go to a Japanese soapland or bathhouse where sexual services are offered because he was angry at himself for being mildly turned on by a 3D girl. It's tough deciding if I prefer this scene or the one in Momoyo's route where a girl in the Kawakami War attempted to show Suguru her boobs. It's a shame that Suguru in the sequels and fan discs became a generic, boring straight man. While my ranking of every other route in this list can fluctuate, one constant remains. The Agave route from the original Majikoi is essentially the closest thing to a perfect visual novel route for me. It stands out as a rare visual novel route without any traditional romance, and in my opinion, it's a superior version of Little Busters' Refrain route. The Agave route excels in several key areas. It's the only route where Gen-san truly becomes a part of the Kazama family, a development missing in other routes, especially in later Majikoi fan discs. Despite its serious narrative, the route maintains the series' characteristic over-the-top charm and humor. What makes Agave exceptional, though, is its balanced approach to storytelling. Memorable moments include Gakudo's emotional temporary sacrifice and Yamato's capture by a surprisingly amusing group of antagonists, the Itagaki family, who had slowly been built up throughout other routes. These events force his closest friends to band together to free him and uncover a drug-related plot. All these aspects contribute to the Kazuma family dynamic, especially when you realize that the true meaning behind the Routes' name, agave, a tree that the childhood friends knew when they were growing up. The Routes' narrative offers fascinating drama and well-executed fight scenes in addition to its emotional core. Koyuki's backstory. Like Miyako, she comes from a challenging family situation and ultimately finds solace through Jun and Toma. This bittersweet yet wholesome theme adds depth to the characters' relationships. Toma's character development is particularly noteworthy as he evolves from a one-dimensional character using bisexuality for humor into a more complex antagonist, though the method of revealing his motivations was still a bit comedic. Even Hideo, a character I previously found frustratingly arrogant, has a compelling moment where he helps Toma overcome his rage by discussing their bonds. Agave represents everything I desire in a route, a perfect blend of friendship, compelling plot, and excellent pacing. It offers a sense of mystery, action scenes that don't overstay their welcome, meaningful character development, and a wholesome, earned ending without relying on convenient plot devices. Despite all the characters that appear in this route, none feel underdeveloped or introduced for no reason. Every character who has a decent amount of screen time feels like they have a purpose, whether it be for emotional moments, serious plot points, or even the small bits of comedy that exist in the route. Now, is this route objectively perfect? No. It has some minor nitpicks, like how Yamato had to use sex to escape imprisonment, which fits his character but felt a bit silly given the situation. While it was nice that they gave Koyuki and Toma interesting backstories, it's unfortunate that the other member of their goofy trio, Jun, basically got nothing in comparison. With all that said though, as mentioned earlier, not only is Agave my favorite Majikoi series route, but it might just be my favorite true route, or hell, even my favorite visual novel route of all time. And that concludes my full ranking of all the currently translated routes in the Majikoi series. On screen, I'm currently showing a visual of what a relative tier list would look like using all the rankings I just did. With over 50 routes in the whole series, and to be liking the vast majority of them to some degree, it shows how much I consider Majikoi one of my all-time favorite visual novel series, or even my favorite media series of all time. You may have noticed I have a bias towards the original Majikoi visual novel, but honestly, outside the couple of routes I hate, I really appreciate that this series, with over 50 routes, was somehow able to maintain surprisingly good consistency with a unique humor style that I wish more visual novels and anime adopted, along with at least some interesting character development, depth, wholesomeness, fun romance, or action scenes. And that finally makes it so that at least up until what exists in 2026, I have reviewed literally every single Majikoi visual novel entry, and thankfully, outside Spark, they are now all translated into English. Something I never thought would actually happen, especially since the original Majikoi VN was stuck at 80% fan translated at one point, and there were several years where we had no idea if or when Majikoi A-3 would be translated, or if Majikoi A+ or Hound After would actually be translated by anybody. I'm heavily grateful that the Majikoi series exists and is now one of, if not my all-time favorite visual novel series. Sure, one could argue Majikoi was probably grasping for straws over time, trying to find any way to have more content to the point of feeling perhaps that the series was getting more shallow after each entry, but the fact that Minato Soft could have a well-received series for so long with so many likable heroines and mostly good routes and consistent comedy and decent enough drama and action, and a protagonist that can switch between being an amusing genius tactician and a usually wholesome boyfriend with actual personality helps make the Majikoi series mostly great all the way up until the end with its spin-offs. If you have any opinions on Majikoi, feel free to leave a comment below.